So, how do we know if we have enough coverage for a catastrophic event, right? I mean, let's say there's something terrible. The worst thing that we think about in our community is, wildfire. There's other parts of the country that, obviously have tornadoes or hurricanes or earthquakes or other natural disasters. But how do we know if we have enough coverage if there's something that happens? Why don't you guys touch on that for a little bit?
Well, I think if you were around after the Marshall Fire, much of the media reporting centered around the folks that were underinsured. And it was heartbreaking because, for most folks, their home is their largest asset. And so to have had a loss and then to realize that their 3,000 square foot house, they only had enough coverage maybe to rebuild 1,000 square feet. But that was just a very common thing that happened with lots of folks in the midst of that fire. And so I'll kind of go back to that importance of meeting with your agent regularly. I sit down and have conversations. Sometimes folks haven't looked at their policy for years. I mean, they've lived up here for 30 years and they've had a policy in place. And even though there are some sort of guidelines with regards to an inflation protection that would kind of keep pace with what the general market is doing. If you have not taken a look and sat down with your agent to say, what would this cover if I had a total loss? It is extremely important that you do that now more so than ever, just because we do see vacillations with, changes in lumber and all those kinds of things I mentioned earlier. But just beyond pure dwelling coverage, your policy covers things like your personal property, and maybe you have a ton of stuff and you want to know, would I have enough coverage if I have a total loss to get all my stuff back? Each policy has different line items for things like loss of use. You need to know how much time you're going to have in temporary housing if you should have a total loss. There have been some legislative pieces that have come out from the Marshall Fire that now have certain criteria and requirements for various things. But if yours is not a wildfire declared by a wildfire disaster declared by the governor, you may not have those coverages that are afforded in the event of a governor declared wildfire. And so would you have ample time to be in temporary housing for your house to be rebuilt? Do you have coverages for ordinance and law? County codes change over time. We know we've recently seen the requirement for gutter guards if you have to replace things. And so do you have coverage to account for those new code things that would have to get you back up to code? But those are those conversations of, Jackie, just like you mentioned, when you get that renewal in the mail, don't throw it away. Reach out to your agent and say, hey, we haven't talked in a while. What is the going rate in our area for rebuild cost? Let's update my estimated cost replacement tool. My needs have changed. And so I want to make sure that my insurance has kept pace with that.
Dusty, what do you typically recommend for a time frame for temporary housing if somebody can't use their home because something happened?
24 months. So most insurance comes with 12 months of coverage. And some companies cannot increase this. I know that we can increase it. So I always bump up my insurance to 24 months. Because up here with weather and everything else, and if we ever did have a huge loss, it's going to take many, many months to build. I do know in the Grand Lake fire, most of the homes got rebuilt around the 2-year mark is when the people started moving back into their homes. So that I would highly suggest doing that one. The building code endorsement, especially if you have an older home. The other thing that I would highly recommend is if you truly want to know what it would cost to rebuild your house, call a contractor. Ask them what the current cost per square footage is. You have to realize that if you have a total home loss, like a wildfire or anything like that with the insurance company, if your foundation is reusable, they do have you reuse your foundation. So that cost would be taken out of that cost to rebuild. But call them, ask them all the questions, ask what the average cost to rebuild is, and just make sure that you are within that limit. And then if your insurance company does offer extended replacement costs, which means that you have your dwelling amount and additional, 20% to 50%. That is in place to cover inflation. Or if you decided to remodel your basement or finish your basement and your dwelling amount doesn't reflect that, that extended replacement cost is there to protect that or to give you that little extra money just in case that dwelling amount doesn't reflect your current cost to rebuild.
Such good advice. Well, and you think about the Marshall Fire too. I mean, you can have a catastrophic event on your own property, but if it impacts the whole community, whether it's a flood or a fire, now the demand for all of these contractors goes through the roof, right? So their time frame of being able to get to your house and their costs associated with that is going to change too. So I really think it's great advice to get those at least 24 months for the rebuild, because imagine all these contractors that are all, you're competing for resources because everyone in your community needs their help. It's going to take longer than if you're just building a new house because you want to, right?